Hola a todos y bienvenidos a la presentación de PowerPoint número 10, los elementos suprasegmentales y la ortografía. Suprasegmentales. So I'm going to speak a decent amount of English in this presentation because one of the main things we're going to do is compare English to Spanish with regard to what we call suprasegmentals. So you're asking what on earth are suprasegmentals? We're generally going to be talking about things that go beyond just your pronunciation. So suprasegmentales, they're aspects such as speed, volume, pitch, emphasis, things that are on top of just the way you pronounce letters, but they're very important in carrying the meaning. A lot of times you've heard the phrase, it's not what you say, but how you say it. That is the case in pretty much any language. We'll talk about the specifics with Spanish and English right now. Número 1, énfasis. Definición primero. El énfasis tiene que ver con el volumen que usamos en pronunciar una sílaba, palabra o frase. So in Spanish, every single word has just one syllable that gets emphasized, meaning you give it a little bit more volume, a little bit more oomph. Sometimes that's a syllable with a written accent mark over it, but sometimes it isn't. En English o en inglés, distinguimos muchas palabras solamente por el énfasis. Unlike Spanish, in English, we often change what syllable of a word we stress in order to make a different word. So, for example, sustantivo, la columna a la izquierda, all of these words are nouns, whereas la columna a la derecha are all verbos adjetivos. So just thinking in English now, if you're talking about a thing, it's an object. I'm going to exaggerate a little bit, but you hear me put a little extra breath into the object. But if we want to say it as a verb, object. So the difference between the noun and the verb, object, object. There's a little bit of difference in the initial vowel and how it is pronounced, but the most noticeable difference is how we shift the emphasis from one syllable to the next. Along the same lines, we have produce as a noun, but produce as a verb. We have a present as a noun, but if you're going to present something, you're emphasizing the second syllable. Polish. Well, polish could be a verb, it could be a noun, it could also be the adjective Polish, but you can see the difference between the sustantivo and the verbo adjetivo. Invalid is a thing, person. Invalid is an adjective. That's a good one to show you the difference. Invalid, invalid. So they have all the same letters. You're mostly pronouncing each individual letter the same, but you're putting extra emphasis on a different syllable. And the last one there, a subject as a noun, but subject as a verb. So in English, it matters. It matters a lot where we put the emphasis on any particular word, which syllable we choose to emphasize, because that can change the meaning. Énfasis es también importante en español, pero los acentos nos ayudan. Right now, when I use the word los acentos, I'm talking about written accent marks. I think most people who are second language learners of Spanish have sort of a love-hate relationship with written accent marks. But what I'd like you to realize is they can actually be very helpful. So here, in the first example, celebre, celebre, we've got the same letters for everyone, and you pronounce each and every sound exactly the same. The only difference is which syllable gets a little bit extra oomph, a little bit extra air behind it, a little bit extra emphasis. So the first one, if you could repeat after me, do a little exaggeration, kick it up a notch to make sure that you're accenting the first syllable there. So after me, celebre, celebre. Then, if you're talking about the preterite yo form of the verb celebrar, your voice accent, your emphasis is going to go on the last syllable. So after me, with a little exaggeration, celebré. Celebré. So in this particular case, the written accent mark told you how to pronounce the word. When it's over the first E, celebré. When it's over the last E, celebré. The next one, saque, as the subjunctive verb of sacar, versus saque, the yo preterite of sacar. On the first one, there is no written accent mark, but you know that it's sake. So pronounce that after me, a little bit extra oomph on the first syllable. Sake. Sake. And then the preterite version, give me some oomph on the last syllable. So after me, sake. Sake. So you don't always have a written accent mark to help you, but when the accent marks are there, it's very useful. Una diferencia importante es que las palabras españolas solamente tienen una sílaba acentuada. El inglés puede tener más. First, I'd like you to just read out loud these words after I do, and then we'll pick them apart a little bit. So after me, unrealistic, unbelievably, blackbird, blackbird. All right, first situation, unrealistic. Which of those syllables do you think carries extra emphasis? Do you think it's just one syllable? Do you think it's more than one syllable? Do you think maybe one syllable is stronger and another one is just a little bit less strong, but stronger than the rest of them? Listen to it carefully again and repeat it. Unrealistic. You really have two. Two of those syllables get extra emphasis. The first one would be the un, but also the I of realistic. Unrealistic. There's some other things going on too, like I'm holding out one of those vowels, unrealistic, more or less like that. How about the next word? After me, unbelievably. Unbelievably. You can hear the emphasis in un. You can also hear it on the IE for unbelievably, unbelievably. So it's like in that word, the leave is the number one most emphasized syllable, but the un at the beginning of the word is the second most accented or emphasized syllable. The rest of them would be below that. How about the next one? The first version, as one word, we're talking about a bird with this actual name, a particular kind of bird. So try this after me. Blackbird. Blackbird. I think it's pretty obvious that it's the first syllable of that that's accented, because we're not saying blackbird, blackbird, but blackboard, 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 blackbird. Sorry about that. Same difference though. And then the next one, you're just describing a particular whatever bird that happens to be black. So what would you say? Blackbird. Which one of those do you think is emphasized more? Blackbird. Blackbird. They're equal. They're absolutely equal. So how we can tell the difference between a blackbird and a blackbird is simply because in the first word in English, we emphasize the first syllable, blackbird. And in the second example there, blackbird, we accent both of those syllables exactly the same. In Spanish, however, there can only be one accented, emphasized syllable per word. And I want to say that again. In Spanish, there's only one emphasized or a little bit extra air, a little bit extra oomph. There's only one syllable per Spanish word, whereas in English we can have more. Normalmente, una frase completa en español tiene un foco, or a focus, de estrés, mientras el inglés puede tener muchos. So this is sort of a elongated version of what we just said. So instead of talking about a particular word and which syllable gets accented, think a little bit more macro now. So we're looking at an entire phrase. An entire phrase in Spanish usually just has one syllable, its focus of stress, that you sort of build up to and then come down from. So with this sentence, just read this naturally after I do. Don't think about it too much. No es el coche de ella que compré. One more time. No es el coche de ella que compré. So which one is accented? Well, this is an exact example, is what I'm trying to say. It's an example that shows that you can change the meaning of a Spanish sentence just by which syllable you emphasize. So let's say somebody just said to you, hey, that's her car that you bought. And you want to protest that isn't the case at all. So they're saying that's her car that you bought. You could say, no, es el coche de ella que compré. So the whole point of that is that it's not her car that I bought. So I'm putting extra voice stress on the no, if that's what I'm trying to say. So no es el coche de ella que compré would be the answer to no, it isn't. That's not her car that I bought. Now, what if you bought something else from her? Not her car, but something else. Let's say like her motorcycle. So if I want to emphasize that it wasn't the car, I would say, no es el coche de ella que compré. No es el coche de ella que compré. So with that extra bit of emphasis on coche, you know that what I'm trying to say is, no, it wasn't a car, it was something else. Now, how about if you bought it from him and not from her? So you're trying to correct the speaker who says you bought her car, and you're trying to say, no, I bought his car. You could say, no es el coche de ella que compré. No es el coche de ella que compré. So you're emphasizing that ella, as in you bought his car, not her car. Lastly, what if you just borrowed the car? You didn't buy it, you just borrowed it. Someone says, hey, you bought that car of hers. And you say, no es el coche de ella que compré. And then you can imagine after that would be, it's the car that I borrowed, not the car that I bought. No es el coche de ella que compré. So you make the decision which word gets emphasized. That depends on what you're trying to say in the sentence. Now, we have one example here in English that's going to prove a point. So even though you could mean several different things with the Spanish phrase up above there with a car, it's still just one word that you picked. Was it the no? Was it the coche? Was it the ella? Was it the compré? You just picked one word to emphasize to change your meaning. Now, thinking more in terms of phonetics than in meaning, say this English sentence after me. We had lots of baseball bats to pick up after the game. One more time. We had lots of baseball bats to pick up after the game. There are several words in there that get more strength, more oomph, more air, more emphasis than others. We had lots of baseball bats to pick up after the game. It's like every other word is emphasized here. We had lots of baseball bats to pick up after the game, especially that after the game. Those are almost equally accented. So, again, en español, una frase completa solamente tiene un foco de estrés. En inglés, podemos tener más. Okay, el problema con cognados. I always tell my 101 students that cognates are good and cognates are bad. The good thing about cognados, and it's really, really helpful when you're first learning a language, is you recognize it. So an English speaker sees the word teléfono, and it's obvious what that means, even if they've never studied Spanish before. Same thing with computadora, or educación, or arquitectura. So the good thing is, when you read them, you recognize them. When you hear them, you recognize them. But when you pronounce them, English speakers sometimes have a habit of letting their English pronunciation effects, they let English get in the way. One of the problems here, el problema con cognados, one of them has to do exactly with what we're talking about, emphasis. Which syllable of the word gets the emphasis? Now in English, obviously, we don't have any written accent marks. But I'm going to go down the column of English words, straight down the left-hand column. And I'd like you to say them after me and give me a little extra exaggeration, a little extra air on the accented syllable. Now again, we don't have written accent marks, but you're putting extra emphasis on it. So try this after me. telephone, computer, acrobat, university, education, nationality, synonym, architecture. If you look at the Spanish versions on the right, they're completely different syllables that are accentuated. So try these after me, just the Spanish right-hand column right now. So after me, give me a little extra exaggeration on what is in red. So you notice that some of those syllables in red do have a written accent mark, some of them don't, but you're giving them extra power. So after me, teléfono, computadora, acróbata, universidad, educación, nacionalidad, sinónimo, arquitectura. Looking over this, I see that I missed the computer trying to anglicize my Spanish. So we know that with nacionalidad, that T would actually be a C. If you hear this before I get it fixed, you'll see that. But if you don't look at this until after I fix it and repost it, then you'll wonder what I'm talking about. It doesn't matter. So now let's compare side to side, English with the Spanish. In every single case, it's a different syllable that gets accented. So when you see a word like teléfono, it's really, really tempting for English speakers to say teléfono, telefono. Well, it's not right, but you could see where a person would get it. You get it from the English, telephone. But we don't want teléfono, we want teléfono. So I'm going to do the English on the left, the Spanish on the right, and I want you to repeat after me, making sure you're really giving extra emphasis to the syllable that is colored. Okay, after me. Telephone, teléfono, computer, computadora, acrobat, acróbata, university, universidad, education, educación, nationality, nacionalidad, synonym, sinónimo, architecture, arquitectura. Let's do the same thing. We won't go through all of the nitty-gritty details I just gave you, but you can see that it's a different syllable in each of these words between English and Spanish that gets emphasized. So let's just do those side-by-side comparisons. So just repeat after me, first the English, then the Spanish. Animal, animal. Pharmacy, farmacia. Accident, accidente. Delicious, delicioso. Hospital, hospital. Final, final. Distance, distancia. Primary, primaria. So, el problema con cognados es que a veces tenemos influencia de la lengua materna para la mayoría de ustedes el inglés. So that's just something to keep an eye on. I did hear it in a lot of your Tarea 6. You were really, really good with the vowels, except some of you on words that were cognates, words that looked a lot like English, you were tempted to use a little bit of English pronunciation with them instead of Spanish. So just something to keep an eye on, or an ear on. All right, número 1, énfasis. Número 2, ritmo. El español es más rápido que el inglés. Have you ever heard that? Have you ever said that? Spanish is faster than English. Oh my gosh, Spanish speakers speak so quickly, I can't understand them. Well, guess what? That is not true. Some Spanish speakers speak quickly, some don't. Just like with any language. Like in English, my husband talks like a machine gun. He will say blah, 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 blah. So he smooshes syllables into little shots. It almost reminds me of a machine gun. But why does everybody think that Spanish is faster than English. Again, some people do speak faster, but it's not because it's Spanish. Here's one reason. Normalmente, todas las sílabas del español son de la misma duración. No es así en inglés. So on the left in blue, you have the Spanish words. Now there are some dialect differences here. There are some differences based on exactly what it is you're talking about. But in general, in Spanish, we want to aim for every syllable to be held out for the same amount of time. We already heard that there's going to be one focused syllable in Spanish, one emphasized syllable with a little extra air. But we don't want to elongate that syllable. So we don't want to say increíble, increíble. Not only am I putting extra breath there, I'm also drawing it out. And we don't want to do that in most cases. So I want to read down the left-hand column, the Spanish, and I want you to repeat after me. And I want you to pay attention to how long each syllable lasts and try to get each syllable to last the same amount of time. So after me, increíble, increíble, profesor, profesor, volumen, volumen, reciclar, reciclar, fascinante, fascinante. So you want to get up the extra air, the extra emphasis, but not the extra length. Now see what happens in the corresponding English words. Inconceivable. If anybody knows Princess Bride, you know that word is important in some of the scenes. If you haven't seen it, go see Princess Bride. It's awesome. But anyway, when I say in English, inconceivable, I'm putting extra air, oomph on that C, but I'm also drawing it out. Inconceivable. How about the next one? English, professor, professor. It doesn't really feel as exaggerated as that first example, but you're putting not only more air, but more time into the E there, professor. How about the next one? It's easier to hear in this one. Volume, volume. Not only am I giving it air, I'm giving it length. Volume. So the syllable va lasts longer than the syllable lum. Lium. Okay, how about the next one? Recycle. Recycle. We're emphasizing the psi and drawing it out. And the last one, fascinating. You can hear the oomph. Can you hear the length? Fascinating. Now pretend that's sarcastic and you can put even another layer of length in there. Fascinating. When we're being sarcastic in English, we tend to draw out syllables, such as fascinating, or that's fabulous. But that can get in the way of our Spanish. So the idea here, normalmente todas las sílabas del español son de la misma duración. Aunque no es así en inglés. Okay. So here's something that I just found fascinating, but that's because I'm a linguistics geek. Some of you will find it interesting, some of you won't, but it will still make a point. So the sentence in Spanish we have here, I'm going to say it and I want you to just listen first. No podía creer que ella pudiera hablar a la profesora en una manera tan irrespetuosa. Now I have a little counter here as I'm doing the recording for these. So I'm going to record, or I'm going to pay attention myself to how many seconds it takes me to say that first sentence. All right. No podía creer que ella pudiera hablar a la profesora en una manera tan irrespetuosa. That took me about 10 seconds. Let me try it again. No podía creer que ella pudiera hablar con la profesora en una manera tan irrespetuosa. Same thing. Same amount of time. Not a minute, but same amount of time. Now, check out the English. It's the same sentence. But listen to me say it. I could not believe that she could talk to the professor in such a disrespectful way. And again, I could not believe that she could talk to the professor in such a disrespectful way. Now let me time it. I could not believe that she could talk to the professor in such a disrespectful way. That was about 8 seconds. I could not believe that she could talk to the professor in such a disrespectful way. So what is happening here? What is happening here with the ritmo is that in Spanish, like I said before, there's only one emphasized syllable per word, but more importantly, all the syllables are the same length. So in essence, in Spanish, the more syllables you have, the longer it takes you to say the sentence. Now that seems to be like stupidly obvious. I'll say that again. The more syllables you have in a Spanish sentence, the longer it will take you to say the sentence. It seems obvious, but in English, it's not true. That's because we put extra emphasis on a few words. I could not believe that she could talk to the professor in such a disrespectful way. So there were several words in there I gave emphasis to. The words that were not emphasized, they actually contract in time. It's almost like you smush more words into a shorter amount of time so that you can focus on the important words. The filler words tend to be quick and softer. So when I say no podía creer que ella pudiera hablar a la profesora en una manera tan irrespetuosa, it takes that many syllables long to say, whereas the version in English, I could not believe that she could talk to the professor in such a disrespectful way, doesn't take as long. So what I'm saying here, sometimes Spanish sounds quicker because every single syllable is the same length, so it always seems like things are going forward. And if you're like me, when I was learning, it seemed like when I was first trying to comprehend spoken Spanish, if I got stuck on one word or one syllable, I just couldn't listen to the rest. But this will help. Okay, now this is really technical. Again, something I found fascinating. Some of you might, others will be rolling your eyes. I get it, I totally do. But I have to talk about it anyway. English is called a stress-timed language, or that same term in Spanish, ritmo acentual. What does that mean? The flow of language in English is determined by the recurrence of heavy stresses rather by the number of syllables, which is just what we said. In English, it takes roughly the same length of time to get from one stressed syllable to the next while speaking at a steady tempo, whether there are few syllables between the stress or many. So I'm going to read the first sentence, and after I read it the first time, I'm going to time it. Bill's going to a party at his friend's house tomorrow. Now let me time it. Bill's going to a party at his friend's house tomorrow. That was 2 seconds long. Now the next one is going to be longer, but it's not going to be as much longer as you might imagine. I'll say it first without timing. My little brother Bill's going to a big party at his best friend's house tomorrow night. Let me time that. My little brother Bill's going to a big party at his best friend's house tomorrow night. That was about 4 seconds. It wasn't twice as long. That's because you picked out the key words. My little brother Bill is going to a big party at his best friend's house tomorrow night. The syllables that are in between, those syllables that get the extra emphasis, they go faster. So unlike Spanish, all of our syllables in an English word are not necessarily the same length. Spanish then is called a syllable-timed language, ritmo silábico, and the definition of ritmo silábico is the flow of language in Spanish is determined by the number of syllables, rather than the number and location of heavy stresses. In Spanish, it takes proportionately longer to say an utterance of 12 syllables than it would a sentence of 10 syllables. So in Spanish, it's actually a little bit easier. How many ever syllables you have, it's going to take you that much longer to say it. So I've transferred those sentences from the first example down here to Spanish. So I'm going to read the first one and then time it. Mañana Bill va a una fiesta a la casa de su amigo. And I'll time it. Mañana Bill va a una fiesta a la casa de su amigo. That's about 4 seconds. Now the next one, with more information in it, more syllables, I'll say once and then time it. Mañana mi hermanito Bill va a una gran fiesta a la casa de su mejor amigo. And now I will time it. Mañana mi hermanito Bill va a una gran fiesta a la casa de su mejor amigo. And that was about 10 seconds. So you see, the longer the sentence is, the more syllables there are, the longer it takes you to say it in Spanish. So we're talking about like a really regimented rhythm, one that's very steady, and in English we don't have that. Okay, practicamos. When we talk about dialects, we'll realize that this isn't a hard and fast rule, especially when we talk about Argentinian Spanish. But for now, just general American Spanish etiquette, linguistic etiquette, is that we're supposed to use the same amount of time to say each syllable. So I want you to repeat after me. Let's go down the left-hand column and then down the right-hand column, and just pay attention to what comes out of your mouth and what you hear. Are all of your syllables about the same length? So after me, increíble, helicóptero, indiscutible, computadora, verdadero, rápido, murciélago, interesante, bisabuela, filosofía. Now that's a little bit tricky for me, just because English, we're so used to, if you have a sentence with a syllable with extra emphasis, it also gets extra length, but not in Spanish. So what you don't want to say is increíble, or computadora, or rápido. Let's do the same thing on the right. So after me, make sure every syllable is about the same length of time. Abuelito, antibiótico, abominable, educación, entusiasmo, fantástico, hipocondríaco, padrastro, hemisferio, religiosas. So you can feel that in each of these words, there is that one syllable that gets extra emphasis, extra volume, but it doesn't get extra length. Okay, número 3, la entonación. Es determinada por las olas de sonido y el número de vibraciones que ocurren por segundo. Well, we don't need to get into the technical physics of it. I actually had to take a physics for music majors class in my undergrad years, so we talked way too much about sound waves. You don't need to have that much knowledge about it necessarily to understand what we're talking about here. So in Espanol, you will probably remember being taught that you can take a statement and turn it into question by doing nothing more than raising pitch at the end. So a statement, vive aquí, vive aquí. If I want to make it a question, I don't have to add any words. I just say, vive aquí, vive aquí. In writing, you can see the question marks. So that is what sets it apart as a question, as opposed to the statement. But when you hear it, and you can't see it, it's that rising pitch that makes it a question. So first the statement, vive aquí. The question, vive aquí. La entonación depende de la lengua y depende en el dialecto, mexicano, argentino, etc. We'll talk about this in more depth when we talk about dialects, but if any of you have watched old cartoons and you have Speedy Gonzales, and he says, ándale, 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 oh, amigo, es mi amigo. It's almost like sing-songy. And then argentino, como si fueran hablando italiano. You get different things that show up with different dialects, but in general, en español, la entonación no afecta el sentido léxico de la palabra como en el chino, pero puede cambiar el sentido comunicativo. So in Chinese, and some of you have had a little bit of dabbling in Chinese, but in Chinese, whether you take the pitch up in a word or down or bizarre combinations of up and down, it changes the meaning of the word. With our examples, if I say, I brought something back for you, and you said, what? That probably means you didn't hear me. So I said, I brought something back for you. What? My voice went way up. And basically what I was saying there is, what did you say? I didn't hear you. Now, what if I made you promise you would not pay any money to buy me a souvenir and bring it back for me? So you say to me, I brought something back for you. And I say, what? A little bit higher, but flat tone. So I brought something back for you. What? Now, what if you're just curious? I'm excited that you brought something back for me from your trip, and I want to know what it is. So you say, I brought something back for you. And I say, what? what? So the intonation is a little different, the volume's a little bit different, the length of the syllable is a little bit different depending on what I'm trying to say. So the word what doesn't change its lexical meaning. I mean, the word what means the word what. But what kind of what, basically, is what we're talking about here. That transfers to Spanish nicely. So if I say, yo compré un coche nuevo, and you didn't hear me, ¿qué? So I'm raising my voice at the end. Yo compré un coche nuevo, ¿qué? Now, in disbelief, yo compré un coche nuevo, ¿qué? ¿Qué? And then I want to know what kind of car you got. It doesn't exactly work grammatically here, but just work with me. Yo compré un coche nuevo. Oop. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so now I'm telling you that I bought a new car, and the answer is what kind of a car? And again, like I said, grammatically a little bit questionable, but work with me. Yo compré un coche nuevo. ¿Qué? ¿Qué? So in English and in Spanish, you can use speed, you can use volume, and you can use intonation, meaning is it high, is it low, is it a little bit of both? Do you go up and down? In pitch, it's actually pitch. It works the same in Spanish. Okay, so that's enough of the suprasegmentales. Now let's talk about ortografía. I've asked this to the sociolinguistics class, but I'll ask everybody. How's your spelling in English? How confident do you feel about your spelling in English? For many people, especially those that go on to study language, you're pretty good at spelling, but you probably worked at it. Other people, even with language study, might say, oh my God, English spelling is a nightmare. Well, you know what? It is a nightmare. We talked about that a little bit at the beginning of this term. It's much, much easier to spell words in Spanish than it is in English. The reason is because English takes a lot of words from other languages, but when we do that, we don't change their spelling. We take the spelling as is, but then we pronounce it any way we want to. So in essence, if you're studying for a spelling bee, I don't know if you've ever heard a spelling bee being televised and someone says, what is the language of origin? The reason for that question is then the contestant can go into their brain and pick out the set of spelling rules that goes with that language. So when we learn English words, it's as if we are learning the pronunciation rules of all the languages that we borrow from. It's important to remember that every language borrows words. Every language borrows words from others. What makes English special and complicated is that we don't bother to change the spelling. We take it as is and then pronounce it any old way we want to, basically. There's not a good correlation, you will recall, between sound and symbol in English. In Spanish, it's much better. But we did talk about it's not perfect. If there were a perfect correlation between sound and symbol, you'd be using the International Phonetic Alphabet. In Spanish, there aren't a lot of cases where a symbol can mean more than one sound, or that more than one sound can make a symbol, or that more than one letter can make the same sound. There aren't that many cases, but there are a few. So little kids who are raised to speak Spanish, either as their only language or as one of the languages, there are a few things they have to get in their mind when it comes to correct spelling. So when they're in grade school, some of these things would come up, but it's nowhere near as complicated as English. So here what I have en la columna a la izquierda, fonema. So the phoneme we're talking about. Then letras del alfabeto, and then finally ejemplos en la columna a la izquierda. So with the phonema B, you already know you can get this from two letters in Spanish, a B or a V. So beso, vaso. That's what makes these minimal pairs. Beso, vaso. Because that same sound, B, can be produced by a B or a V. What about G? Many times it's just the letter G, but sometimes it has to be GU. The U doesn't carry a sound, it just goes with the G. So by itself, G, gato. But guerra, there is absolutely no sound that goes with that U. But if you took it out and then you just had G-E-R-R-A, it would be gera, And we don't want gera. We want to keep that g sound. This should sound a little familiar if you think about preterite of pagar, that pagué, how you had to make the G into a GU. Same thing here. So I'm simply saying that the sound g can be obtained in Spanish with either the letter G or the letter GU. All right, k. We have three possibilities. C, QU, or in some borrowed words, a K. K doesn't happen indigenously in the Spanish language. It didn't evolve naturally. But with words that we've taken in Spanish from other languages, you might find it, like in kiosco. But all of these are going to go k. Casa, queso, kiosco. In that queso, the U has absolutely no sound whatsoever. It's not queso, just queso. So it's a k sound. Okay, that R. We've talked about how you could get it with a double R, like in perro or carro, but you can also get that sound with a single letter, R, letter of the alphabet, if it comes at the beginning of a word group, at a breath group. Here it's just a word, but beginning of a breath group, Ricardo. So in Ricardo, you only have one written R. In perro, you have the R, but they both make that vibrante multiple. Then S, three possibilities, C, S, or zeta. We've talked about this a little bit, and we're talking about General American Spanish, not Spain. So siento, sopa, zapato. Remember that the letter Z is never the sound Z in Spanish, zapato. Then with a H, you have three possibilities, a G, a J, or an X. G, gente, J, jamón, X, Mexico. And finally, the sound Y could be gotten with the letter ella, or a Y, Y, or the combination of H-I-E, like in hielo. So double L, llamo, Y, yeso, H-I-E, hielo. So those are some spelling difficulties to keep in mind, but so much easier in English. So how about putting this into practice? Some of these errors that I've put in these Spanish sentences are basically impossible, as in not even a native speaking child would make these mistakes. But in many cases, what I want to point out is phonetically, you can get these sounds in more than one way, but when you learn an actual word and you learn how to write it, there's only one way to spell it. So let's look at number one. The fact that I have two S's in possible, posible, and two M's in inmaduro, what I'm trying to get at there is, let's say this was an English-speaking student who made these mistakes. Immature and possible in English would have double consonants, which you don't get in Spanish. But the best example that I want to point out here, hijo. Phonetically speaking, I-X-O says hijo. So if you didn't know how to read or write Spanish and someone said to you, hijo, these are the sounds that actually come out, hijo. But people who speak Spanish and learn Spanish when they are children, they would have to learn that the spelling of that word would be H-I-J-O. H-I-J-O is the correct spelling. But it would sound exactly the same if it were written I-X-O. Down below that, escuela, phonetically speaking, that Q-U could fit there, and it would sound like escuela. And ofrece, that S there, is supposed to be a C, but this would make the same sound if it were a word in Spanish, ofrece. So some of these are really far-fetched, but a lot of them aren't. So what I'd like you to do in your notes is correct all the spelling errors you can find and really discipline yourself to do as much of it as possible without looking. Do as much as you can. Then we'll go to this page and you can check your answers against this. And that is the end of our presentation on suprasegmentales y la ortografía. Next up, written accent marks. You love it, you know you do. I'll see you in a bit.